When I first played Castlevania Symphony of the Night, there was one particular moment that really stood out to me, and it likely stood out to many other people. It occurs during the game's final boss. So, if you don't want to be spoiled on this almost 30-year-old game now, here is your warning. As Alucard defeats his father Dracula, the two of them have one final exchange, in which Dracula, the Lord of Darkness, quotes the Bible of all things. In fact, he specifically references the words of Jesus Christ while talking to his disciples in Matthew 16.
Sarcasm. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the world and loses his own soul? Matthew 16:26, I believe.
This saying is a good sentiment on its own. What good is power? What good is it to gain the whole world if it comes at the cost of losing yourself? Losing what makes you human.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets!
Yeah, I get it, Drac. A little bit of context for anyone who's not familiar with Castlevania. The whole reason that Dracula wages a war against humankind for hundreds of years is because humanity wrongfully executed his wife, the only link to humanity that he had left. But while Dracula sought revenge, the last words of his wife Lisa to her son during her execution was a plea for the two of them not to seek retribution, for fear of her husband's and her son's souls. Once Alucard reveals this to him, Dracula sees the irony of the situation and makes his declaration. In trying to vindicate his wife, he became the very thing that she did not want him to become. But what about that Bible verse? Like I said, Dracula quotes from the Gospel of Matthew. However, the same exchange can also be found in Mark chapter 8 and Luke chapter 9. And this phrase takes on a very different meaning whenever you look at the verse within its full context. It's a pretty significant moment, actually. While traveling with his followers, Jesus stops and asks his disciples, "Who do people say that he is?" And then he asks them, "Who do they think he is?" It is his disciple Simon Peter who responds by saying, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him by saying, "Blessed are you, Simon." No, not that Simon, that Simon. Here, Jesus not only reiterates that he is the Son of God, but he also makes it clear that he must die and be raised back to life by God in order to save humanity from their sins. Now, of course, at the time, his followers don't quite understand everything that he's saying, and they tell him that there's no need for him to die. So Jesus responds by saying this, "For you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." Then Jesus told his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul?" The point Jesus is making is that following him is not easy and will require sacrifice, possibly even death. But even if your body were to die, your soul will be saved because of your belief in something greater. It is better to die physically for the sake of God because your soul will be fine, than to conversely live for yourself and lose your soul in the process. It's admittedly a theologically heavy sentiment, and while Dracula's quote only tells part of the story, it fits within Symphony's context, Dracula choosing his own path instead of the path that Lisa wanted for him. Now, I always find it fascinating whenever video games reference the Bible. Now, part of that fascination is because I am a Christian, and seeing parts of my religion represented in media always catches my attention. But having studied to be a history and literary teacher, as well as also getting a specific degree in New Testament studies, it's interesting for me to see how people use and adapt biblical elements, stories, and icons. It's fascinating how people will integrate this into their works. And while it is a religious book, the Bible has largely made its way into the larger cultural mythology of the West as a whole. So even if you haven't read it or haven't ever been to church, you're likely familiar with a lot of the stories found in there, like David and Goliath, Noah's Ark, Adam and Eve, so on and so forth. So that's why I thought it would be neat to make a video going over biblical references that I've found while playing video games. Now, this is in no way an exhaustive list, and these may not even be the most famous examples of this from their respective series, but the rules I'm going by for this video is that this has to be something that I noticed while playing a game, and it has to have its origin in the Bible specifically, not some other element of church tradition. It has to come from the Bible. In my research for this video, however, I did find loads of other biblical references in some of these games. Enough where I could give some game series their own dedicated video. So, you know, if you guys end up enjoying this one, think of it as a preview for another video series I could make. And let me know if you want to see more like this in the future. Also, just to cover all my bases, a potential spoiler warning for all the following games you see on screen. Let's start off with a game series steeped in history and religion, Assassin's Creed. Now, multiple different mythos are woven into the fictional history of the AC universe, including the Bible. And it's in Assassin's Creed 2 where the full scope of this interconnectivity is first seen. While using the Animus to relive your ancestors' memories, you can stumble across these strange glyphs all throughout Italy. Upon scanning them, a previous Animus test subject begins to reveal the wider conspiracy not only about the Assassin and Templar conflict, but about human history as a whole. And among the various historical figures and instances, several biblical characters and events can be seen. For example, in the Instruments of Power glyph, we see Samson, the Israelite judge on whom God bestowed strength before being betrayed by the Philistine Delilah, John the Baptist, a prophet and cousin of Jesus who preached about the coming of God's Son, Peter, the disciple of Jesus and early church leader after Christ's death and resurrection, and Moses, whom God used to bring the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt by parting the Red Sea and leading them into the Promised Land. In the glyph titled Brothers, several depictions of Cain and Abel are shown. They are the first sons of Adam and Eve, and in Genesis 4, Cain kills his brother in a fit of jealousy, since God did not look favorably upon his offerings as he did on Abel's. According to the Bible, this is the world's first murder and first human death. Now, the text accompanying these images, however, are not from the Bible, but rather from a Mormon text, the Pearl of Great Price, which, like I said, is not a biblical source. Puzzle 7 is titled Keep on Seeking and You Will Find. This is most likely taken from Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 13, where the King James translation says, "And ye shall seek me, and find me, when ye shall search for me with all your heart." Now in the Bible, this verse comes from a prophecy and promise of restoration while the Israelites are in exile. Here, it's been repurposed to encourage you to keep seeking the truth. Within the puzzle, however, are a lot more interesting biblical references, including more figures like Joseph, the son of Jacob who received a coat of many colors, David, the boy who killed Goliath and later became the king of Israel, and Jesus Christ himself, with the second part of the puzzle depicting his crucifixion. Now, within the Assassin's Creed lore, it is the Templars who actually had Jesus killed, and based on some hidden lore entries throughout the series, it is heavily implied that Jesus came back to life due to a piece of Eden rather than any sort of divine power. In fact, every biblical character that I've mentioned so far in this game is implied to have received their special status and any miraculous powers they had due to these pieces of Eden. Now, to be perfectly blunt, everything here is technically heresy. Especially the removal of Jesus' divinity. That is just straight up heretical. So, is this a bad biblical representation? Well, as far as accuracy to the source material, yes, but of course the game creator's intentions was not to insult these Bible characters. Assassin's Creed is a fictional story with a fictional history that rewrites several moments in time. It's not exclusive to Christianity either, with other religions and even human history treated the same way. The game even opens by saying it didn't make any of these decisions with any sort of ill intentions. If anything, I'd argue it gives more respect to the Bible than most forms of media do. And while admittedly the religious part of myself and the more scholarly part of myself do feel a bit conflicted about some of the choices they made here, this video only serves to point out these biblical references in games, not necessarily give my thoughts and feelings on them. And of course, I can't talk about Assassin's Creed without mentioning the primary MacGuffin of the series, the pieces of Eden, namely, the Apple of Eden. To refresh you on your AC lore, before human history, there was an advanced, almost godlike race known as the Isu, who controlled humanity and the world. Eventually, they were all wiped out, and then human civilization truly began. But the relics of their advanced technology still exist today, which are the pieces of Eden talked about in the previous truth glyphs. Now, the primary pieces in the early Assassin's Creed games were called the Apples of Eden, an obvious reference to the Garden of Eden and humanity's fall into sin as talked about in Genesis 3. In fact, the reward for solving all 20 glyphs is even a video showing two humans, named Adam and Eve, escaping from the Isu with one of these apples. In the world of Assassin's Creed, the basis of all human mythologies and religions stems from the Isu race. But let's get back to the apple. Now, I think most people are familiar with the Cliff Note versions of this story. However, in Genesis, it never explicitly refers to the fruit as an apple. God simply tells Adam and Eve, "You may surely eat of every tree in the garden, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die." Now, there's quite a bit to unpack in a verse like that, but to prevent this video from turning into a full-on theological and philosophical debate, just know that this tree and its fruit were the only thing off-limits to the pair, and they were persuaded to disobey this command God had given them by the devil disguised as a serpent, which led to sin entering the world and Adam and Eve being removed from the garden, so that they would not eat from the tree of life and have to live forever with their shame and sin. From a mythological and literary standpoint, this forbidden fruit and its knowledge have long been a symbol of greater forbidden power due to the serpent's lie to Eve that it would make them like a god. In Assassin's Creed, the apple is a piece of Isu technology that bestows seemingly godlike powers upon its user, drawing a parallel between this fruit of forbidden knowledge and the one found in Scripture. Another game with references to humanity's early days is the PS2 classic Shadow of the Colossus. Many people consider this one of the most atmospheric video games ever, and I recently played through it for the first time here on the channel. The video will be linked in the description if you want to check it out. The game sees you travel to a forbidden land in order to save a young girl. In order to do so, you are instructed to kill 16 colossi by a disembodied figure named Dorman. Now, the Forbidden Lands have an unnatural and ancient feeling to them, like somewhere that existed long ago at the very beginning of time. A lot of this comes down to the monstrous colossi who seem to be the lone residents of this place. Many of them seem to take general inspiration from various creatures of myth. And while some of these designs feel loosely based on biblical creatures, such as the seventh colossi and its seeming link with the Leviathan, none of them are quite definitive enough for me to mention them today. The more blatant biblical reference in this game is found in the one who sent us on this very quest, Dorman. Now, about halfway through my playthrough, revelation struck me as I realized that Dorman, spelt backwards, is none other than Nimrod. Now, thanks to Bugs Bunny, whenever you hear the name Nimrod, you probably think of a bumbling buffoon like Elmer Fudd. But Nimrod is actually another character found in the book of Genesis. And trust me, he is anything but stupid. Genesis 10 talks about the descendants of Noah after the flood. And here, Nimrod is first described as the first on earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. From that land he went into Assyria and built Nineveh. Nimrod is typically the figure credited with starting the creation of the Tower of Babel. In Genesis 11, the people who migrated to the plains of Shinar, the same area verse 10 tells us Nimrod established his kingdom, say, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." Now, this was in direct rebellion of God's command after the flood in chapter 9, to be fruitful and multiply, and to fill the earth. So, God went down and confused the languages of the people, leading to them separating and spreading out into the various different nations. Mythologically speaking, Nimrod is seen by some to be the beginning of false worship, and a rebel against God due to his pride in attempts to build a tower into heaven. And Dorman fills a similar role as a blasphemous figure within the Forbidden Lands. Although he's never outright confirmed to be evil, he is clearly the enemy of the kingdom and priests that we see at the end of the game. Dorman was sealed away and divided into 16 colossi in order to keep him at bay. According to the dialogue of Emon at the end of the game, he is clearly a false god to some extent. Similarly, he resides within this central temple in the game where he communicates with the player, and it certainly bears design elements to traditional depictions of the Tower of Babel. In fact, the final boss of the game, the 16th Colossus, is depicted as a giant man seemingly built into a massive tower, once again invoking Babel imagery. If none of this is enough proof, it seems the game devs were originally going to be far less subtle, with the original title of the game actually being Nimrod and the Colossus. So far we've tackled some pretty big and in-depth references that need some explanation, so let's slow things down for a bit with a few references to just Bible verses, and quite a few of those can be found throughout the Fallout franchise. Some of them as soon as you start a new game. At the beginning of Fallout 3, we live through the birth of our player character, who was born on July 13th. Now, many people believe that that date, 7/13, is in fact a reference to Micah 7:13. But the earth will be desolate because of its inhabitants, for the fruit of their deeds. It's not hard to draw a comparison between this verse and the wasteland we find ourselves in Fallout. Micah 7 is a lament on the state of the world by the titular prophet, commenting on the corruption of its leaders and the eagerness for violence that the people feel. Fallout similarly has always been about human nature and their desire for war, and the consequences that come from that greed and malice. Because war, well, you know. And all we are left with is the fruit of our deeds. Another famous verse in Fallout 3 is Revelation 21:6. Now this verse can be seen as early as the starting vault, all the way until near the end of the game, where it's found in the water purifying facility.
Revelation 21:6. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give unto him that is athirst of the fountain of the water of life freely.
Anyone who has played the game can clearly see its relevance to the plot of Fallout 3, which sees you fight for control of a water purifying facility, which can give decontaminated water to the denizens who remain in Washington, D.C. In fact, James, the player character's father, says that it was his wife's favorite verse, and now it has become the activation code for Project Purity. But of course, you can't mention biblical references in Fallout without bringing up an infamous figure from New Vegas. Residing within the remains of Zion National Park is a gunslinging missionary, Joshua Graham. Now, there's enough biblical references throughout the Honest Heart DLC to get its own video, which again, if this video does well, will likely happen one day. But if I'm being completely honest, I haven't had a chance to play through that DLC in its entirety yet, so I'm just going to focus on one thing for now. That being Joshua Graham's unique .45 handgun, the light shining in darkness. The weapon gets its name from the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 5. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Etched into the sides of the gun is this very verse written in Greek, which was the language that much of the New Testament was originally written in. The phrase is also particularly prevalent in the Mormon religious text, The Doctrines and Covenants, which makes sense seeing as Joshua Graham is a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints. Now, it's worth noting that Mormonism is not the same thing as Christianity, the theological differences of which are too much to get into with this video. However, the Bible is a common core text between the two, and of course, this verse in particular originally comes from the New Testament. Now let's return to the series we started this video with. Much like Bram Stoker's original novel, the Castlevania series is full of imagery and iconography related to church tradition. But as far as something explicitly from the Bible, there is one boss who stands out above all the others in my mind, and who again is found in Symphony of the Night. Deep within the catacombs of Dracula's castle, Alucard will stumble across this monstrous opponent who appears to be a pile of corpses formed into a floating orb. Now this would become a recurring boss throughout the Castlevania franchise. Here in Symphony of the Night, his name is translated as the Grand Falloon, but subsequent games settled on the title of Legion. Those familiar with the Gospel might recognize that name from a particular story involving Jesus and a demon-possessed man. Now, it can actually be found in 3 of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but I will specifically be reading the account from Mark chapter 5. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of Gerasenes, and when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with chains. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles into pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out in a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For Jesus was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So Jesus gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered into the pigs. And the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city that was in that country, and people came to see what had happened. And they came to see Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs, and they began to beg Jesus to depart from the region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. And Jesus did not permit him, but he said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy upon you." And he went away, beginning to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. This enemy takes on a far more chilling aspect in my eyes knowing its origin. Not only has this entity faced Jesus before, but it is a multitude. Perhaps every zombie that falls off the main body is a corpse possessed by one of the many demons that make up Legion. Let's end this video with one final series so heavily steeped in religious and literary references that its own title is associated with holiness. Anyone who has played Halo can tell you the importance that myth and religion play throughout the series. Now, while I have considered this video idea before, a big inspiration to actually make it was a recent video made by Hidden Xperia, who partnered with YouTuber Wendigoon to talk about the religious symbolism in Halo. I recommend you check it out if you haven't seen it already. Still, I wanted to tackle at least one aspect of Halo due to a personal connection I have to it. While the majority of Halo's story involves the struggles between humanity and the alien covenant, a third party joins the story that poses a threat to life on both sides of the conflict: the Flood. If you aren't familiar with it, the Flood is an alien parasite that infects a living organism and takes control of their body to use as a biological food source. The species is also a hive mind and absorbs the memories and knowledge of everything that they infect and consume, becoming smarter and nigh unstoppable the more they feed. And this is why they are called the Flood, because they can become a wave of destruction throughout the entire galaxy. In fact, the Flood is the very reason why the Halos exist at all. Hundreds of thousands of years before the events seen in the game, there was a race known as the Forerunners. They were the apex of ancient life and the guardians of the universe. But when the Flood first emerged, the Forerunners were helpless to stop their spread. Ultimately, the choice was made to create a superweapon, the Halos. Now, the Halos could stop the spread of the Flood, but it meant killing their food source. So that meant the death of any and all biological life in the galaxy. The only place in the universe safe from the Halos' range was the very place where the Forerunners built the Halos, a forge installation outside of the known universe known as the Ark. In order for life to exist after the firing of the rings, the Forerunners began to collect and catalog a sample of every life form and creature in the universe and preserve them on the Ark until the Halo had done its job. Sacrificing themselves in the process, the Forerunners fired the Halo array, wiping out the Flood, and then automated ships began reseeding life on the affected planets using those who were spared on board the Ark. Okay, that was a lot of story condensed into a little bit of time, and there are some finer lore details that I'm sure the Halo fans are going to leave in the comments, but that's all the important stuff that you need to know for the purpose of this video. And I'm sure you've already figured out exactly where this plotline and the imagery associated with it comes from. The story of Noah's Ark is pretty well known. Covered in Genesis chapters 6 and 8, the story begins showing that only a few generations after the creation of the world, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. However, there was one righteous man named Noah, and God said to him, "I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, for behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh in which there is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female." So due to man's wickedness and to combat the spread of this evil, God decided to destroy the world with a flood. However, to preserve life, he had Noah and his family build an ark to protect themselves and to protect a sample of every animal species. And the rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wives and the 3 wives of his sons with them entered the ark. They and every beast according to its kind, and all the livestock according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him. And the Lord shut him in. And all the flesh died that moved upon the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all of mankind. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and the birds of heaven. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark. Just as the Bible tells of a world where corruption spread freely and a select few were saved from a cleansing destruction, Halo adapts the same story for the background of its universe. And if the name reuse of Ark and Flood haven't convinced you that this was an intentional decision, within the Ark terminals on Halo 3, you can find reference to the first planet infected by the Flood outbreak, which was known as G6-17. a reference to Genesis 6:17. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh in which there is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on earth shall die. It's clear to see the Bible's influence in all of these games and many more. And it's no surprise, even people who are not religious know many of the stories and ideas found within its pages. In many ways, it's a cornerstone of humanity, prevalent in cultures and ideologies around the globe, primarily influencing the legends and the stories that we tell. It is a dynamic work featuring historical accounts, poetry, mythology, cultural records, letters, prophecy, and so much more. Now, while my goal was not necessarily to evangelize anyone through this video, I have made my beliefs about the Bible no secret on this channel. And since I do see it as the Word of God, I find it fascinating how it ends up in so many different corners of human culture. It reminds me of a quote by Lord of the Rings author J.R.R. Tolkien. "We have come from God, and inevitably the myths woven by us, though they contain error, will also reflect a splintered fragment of the true light, the eternal truth that is with God. Indeed, only by myth-making, only by becoming sub-creator and inventing stories, can man aspire to the state of perfection that he knew before the fall. Our myths may be misguided, but they steer, however shakily, towards the true harbor. The Bible says that when God created us, we were made in His own image. And just as God is a creator, so too does humanity have a desire to create. And video games are a world all their own, meticulously designed as a labor of love and a testament to man's creative nature. As I said at the start of this video, this is only the tip of the iceberg whenever it comes to biblical references found in video games. Like, did you know that Master Chief's name, John 1:17, is likely a reference to a Bible verse? Or the fact that every achievement in New Vegas' Honest Hearts DLC gets its name from a verse in the Psalms. If you're interested in learning about more biblical references in video games, let me know in the comments and I'll make more videos going in depth on some of the series I've listed here. Or if you enjoy other types of references, check out my video on literary references in video games, which will be linked in the description below. I also make other analytical videos from time to time, but I primarily just play through classic games and have a good time. If you're interested in checking any of that out, please explore the channel or any of the videos and playlists that I've linked below. Otherwise, take care and I will see you guys in the next one. God bless.